Well, thank you. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Travis. And it's so exciting to see so many people on the webinar today. I know, like Travis said, it's a record. So it's as if aging affects everyone or something. I don't know why y'all are here, but it seems like a pretty relevant topic to be talking about these days. Katie, Amy, and I have shared this presentation before, and we have lots of conversations on ageism through our work. And we know that this is always a very important topic, and we're excited to bring that to ESP today. So to kick us off, just a brief introduction. As Travis said, I'm Dr. Erin Yellen from Kansas State University. I currently serve as an associate professor and an extension specialist for adult development and aging. And I'm also the interim director of our Center on Aging here on campus. Joining me today, I have two of my fantastic colleagues, Dr. Amy Fox, who is one of our assistant professors of gerontology at K-State, and Katie Sigmund, who's one of our instructors who works with our gerontology students and talks all about all kinds of good things related to aging. So we're so excited to be here today and be sharing this message with you all. So just to kick us off, talk a little bit about baby boomers and who in the heck all of these people are, right? So we know that baby boomers have single-handedly changed the face of the United States population for more than 70 years, and they certainly continue to do so today. This isn't something new. So I'm going to take you through a quick crash course on the boomers and on boomers in general and in the workforce. So who are the boomers? Those are those individuals born between 1946 and 1964. So as of today, the oldest of the boomers are about 76 and the youngest are about 58 years old. And this population, as I'm sure all of you know, is huge. When people were getting back from the war, they really missed their wives and, you know, things happened and we had lots of babies. So that's why we're looking at this huge population here. So there's about 73 million baby boomers, according to the 2020 census. So again, huge population. And of course, it's growing. So a couple of tidbits of statistics for you. Since 2010, 10,000 people a day turn 65. So huge, 10,000 a day. And of course, this is going to continue to grow. And another fact that many people find super duper surprising is that the population of older adults is expected to outnumber children aged 0 to 18 by 2060. Of course, that's the first time in global history of life that that has ever happened. So baby boomers, they're huge, they're here to stay, big population we need to be talking about. So all of those population trends that I was just sharing, of course, have huge implications on our workforce as well, which is one of the reasons we're here to talk to you today. So the percentage of workers age 55 and older has doubled in the last 25 years. And we can see here that about 20% of the workforce will be over the age of 65 by 2030. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the workforce and the aging workforce. So we can see, if you look at Bureau of Labor Statistics and some other good census data, we see that the annual growth rate of the labor force is divided by age, and we can see that adults 55 and older are by far the fastest growing portion of the total labor force. Probably not surprising to you. So the annual growth rate of adults 55 plus in total is 2.3%. But let's break it down and look just a little bit closer at those baby boomers. So of those baby boomers, the early age baby boomers, we're looking at an annual growth rate percentage of 3.8. So let's put that into a little bit of perspective here. So 3.8 for those baby boomers. When we're looking at adults aged 25 to 54, the annual growth rate is 0.3%. So looking at 3.8 versus 0.3 for those individuals aged 25 to 54. So obviously some really, really big discrepancies there in who is making up our workforce and who will be making up our workforce in the future. Finally, we can see that not only is the workforce growing in numbers, but they're not reducing their hours of when they're working and how long they're working, right? So many people might expect that old people, they're not working full time, they're part-timers, right? Few hours here and there. Well, that is simply not the case. We can see that the percentage of the workforce of those who work part-time is actually decreasing versus the full-time workforce population is actually increasing. So quite the opposite of what many people might expect. So we know about the workforce, we know the baby boom population is huge and they are continuing to work, they're here to stay. So let's transition and talk a little bit about those boomers in the workforce. So what do we think about them? Are they valued? Why do we care about these people and why should we care? Are they just the dead weight? What are we doing with these people? So let's transition from talking about these numbers to something a bit deeper. And that's that conversation on ageism that we'll be having today. So to kick us off, we want to ask you a question. You can respond in the chat. Since there's so many of you, I don't want to have to navigate unmuting. So we will follow the chat here as best as we can. So our question: how have you seen older employees be treated at your institution or workplace? So this can be yourself or your peers. If it's yourself, you don't need to give us any personal details, but go ahead and share. How have you seen older employees being treated in the workplace? Okay, so I see typically with respect. People seem to think I have all the answers. They value experience, resources valued. Why are you still, questions of why are you still working? No different than anyone else. Respect, not particularly with value. Impatience, mentors, how much longer will you work? Respectfully, leave to do anything you want. Both respected and valued for their wisdom, but frustration. More respect than I got as a woman in the field and a male field when I started. Old school, institutional knowledge to be lost, respected and valued. Get dumped on because they're more dependable than younger people. Can be considered dead weight if not productive or respected and valued. She won't be here long. Not as smart as freshly graduated young people. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, first of all. So I see our chat is slowing down. Lacking tech savvy. I'm always the first one to arrive and the last one to leave. Yeah. So rest assured, these are common responses, and we see a lot of these sort of like polarizing ways of how we treat older adults in the workplace. So sometimes it's really good. We see that there's respect and value and sort of that institutional knowledge, which many of us really thrive on and really appreciate. But we also see that there's a lot of not so good things that go on in the workforce. Sometimes those things are externalized, sometimes they're internalized, all sorts of stuff going on that we'll be talking about today when I pass it off to my colleagues here. So thank you so much for participating in that question. We'll have a few more questions to go, so I hope you continue participating and thinking about all of these good things. So I will go ahead and pass it off to Amy, who's going to share a bit more about what ageism is and why it matters.
Okay, thank you, Erin. And it's great to be here. And as Erin mentioned, I have the exciting part of the presentation where I get to kind of break down what ageism and ageism in the workplace, really looks like, and some of those definitions. And I'm going to kind of break this down into different ageism in different forms. And so, starting off, we're going to focus on kind of the individual, our personal biases towards age. And then we're going to chat for a few minutes about what ageism looks like in the workplace, and then more broadly in our society. So, starting off, the term ageism was actually coined by Dr. Richard Butler in 1969, and he was an American physician and gerontologist, and he was the first director of the National Institute on Aging. And he was really known for his groundbreaking work on the social needs and rights of older adults. His background, he was actually raised in the 30s and 40s with his grandparents. And by the time he entered the medical field, he was very aware, well, and even before that, he became very aware of how people treated his grandparents. Um, and even within his medical training, he found that his teachers, professors, instructors, medical professionals were dismissive and often had contentious attitudes about older adults. Um, and he felt he didn't get the best training for working with older adults. And so he really became focused on, what are these issues and why do we have these different attitudes towards older adults? Um, and like the other isms that we are aware of, he defined ageism as a systematic stereotyping of and discrimination against people because they are old. Um, and now I just want to recognize also that ageism can kind of be on all sides of the age. We see ageism for older adults, but also for younger adults. I just wanted to point that out. But on this little graph, you can see there's kind of three different areas that Dr. Butler believed, as with other isms. It's ageism is this combination of elements, and it includes um, stereotypes and prejudices and discrimination. So, stereotypes, kind of broadly speaking, are those thoughts that we have, things that we have internalized, whether that's because of our experiences or what is portrayed in media, kind of those values that our society has. But stereotypes, and I do have to apologize, my dog is freaking out that I'm not paying attention to him. So, sorry about that. Um, so I just included an example of what that might look like in the workplace. So a thought you might have, and we saw some examples of this in the chat with the last question, older adults this, might not be as productive and can't learn new skills. So that might be a thought that I have that would be ageist, kind of making assumptions about people's skills based on their age. Now, we all know that our thoughts can lead to feelings, which can lead to behaviors and actions. And this is same goes for ageism. Um, those stereotypes often lead to prejudices. So prejudices are more of those feelings, such as my older coworker is just taking away from employment opportunities from younger workers. So we saw a lot of people mentioning things like, when are you going to retire? How much longer are you working? Comments about being dead weight in the workforce. So those are those prejudicial. Oh, sorry. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Um, Let me know if my sound keeps having issues, but okay, doing good. Again, those prejudices can then lead to actions or behaviors, that discrimination piece. So a discriminatory practice might be refusing to offer a professional development opportunity to an older employee. Again, these are founded in those prejudices and those stereotypes. Now, of course, all of these kind of internalized individual thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can certainly be perpetuated by institutional practices and policies. And we'll get into that in a few minutes here. So ageism in the workplace, I've listed here just a few kind of myths about older workers, and then the reality. So thinking about why we have age discrimination in the workplace. Again, a lot of these were brought up in the chat function, um, but a lot of these myths keep older adults out of the workforce or make them face discrimination in their workplace settings. So some of these include older adults might be sick more and cost more to employ because of their need for benefits. When in reality, many studies have found that older employees actually use fewer sick days. Um, there was one recent study that said older adults, when they do use sick days, take them for longer periods of time, but take less overall. So there's some discrepancy in the studies there, but they often have lower health costs because they're no longer ensuring dependence as well. So we can kind of bust through some of these or some of these myths when we look at the reality of older workers. Another myth is that older workers might have difficulty evaluating information and solving problems. Um, a- and again, these are general myths that don't apply to every individual in every circumstance, when the reality is a lot of you mentioned in the chat that institutional knowledge, that experience that you have built up as an older employee. Oftentimes older workers have superior interpersonal and problem solving skills that they're able to apply, and we have to recognize those. Other myths might be that older adults are not as productive or struggle to learn new skills. When the reality is, again, we have that workplace experience. We often know how to be the most efficient based on our experience of what we're doing. Um, Older adults often have more focus and are just as tech savvy as, you know, younger adults. I feel like we're all kind of learning new technology as it comes out, and we shouldn't kind of assume that older workers are not going to be able to do that as well. Another myth that isn't addressed specifically on this slide, but kind of came up essentially in the chat, is what is often termed as the greedy geezer myth, unfortunately. But essentially, this idea that older adults are working longer and taking away jobs from younger people, and if they're it's kind of this double-edged sword. If older adults are not working, then they're taking up entitlement benefits through Social Security and Medicare and then hurt our economy. So, really, these attitudes towards older adults and what they choose to do during that time is really often a no win circumstance for older adults when we have ageist biases and attitudes. Um, the reality is, though, that older adults aren't taking away jobs from younger adults. This is really an economic labor issue. Um, and the reality is, older adults often create more employment opportunities for younger adults by creating new businesses. They can mentor younger adults. So there's lots of opportunities that we often overlook when we're focused on those aging biases that we might have. Okay, so kind of another element of ageism that we think is important to recognize and understand is the difference between implicit and explicit ageism. And Erin briefly mentioned kind of understanding the difference between internalized and externalized behaviors and attitudes. This kind of goes along that same line. I just want you to think for a minute. You don't have to raise your hand. This is not a literal question for you, but think if I were to ask you to raise your hand if you would consider yourself ageist. Okay. But now think about, and what would you do if I asked you to raise your hand if you maybe were worried about aging and maybe you were a little bit afraid of aging? So I want you to think about the difference between those two perceptions and your answers to those. Whereas most of us, I would hope, would not raise our hands to say that we're ageist, I would think a lot more of us might be more afraid of aging and what that looks like. Um, so the difference here, kind of the main difference here, is implicit ageism are those thoughts and feelings that really operate kind of under our awareness. They're part of our subconscious. They're often kind of ingrained by those societal values and attitudes. we're not often aware that this is even a form of ageism. It's more subtle. So it's things like, you know, anti-aging products, right? Um, right? Maybe we're dyeing our hair more because we're afraid of that gray showing through. Um, Another example is the way we speak to older adults, whether it's, we speak slower or louder. We make assumptions that they need us to make those changes. Um, so this can often be patronizing for older adults, this implicit ageism. Now, explicit ageism is obviously more, we are more aware of that. It's kind of intentional control about your thoughts about older adults. And this is where we find those really prejudicial attitudes and discriminatory behaviors. Okay, so the kind of final overall broad look at ageism that I wanted to discuss here um, are these different levels of ageism. So we kind of briefly mentioned these, um, but these go from, again, those internalized or embodied, if you look at that smallest circle, attitudes towards aging, all the way to kind of those societal, structural, um, whether it's policy, practices. And so I just wanted to give you examples of each of these. Um, Again, those embodied kind of stereotypes that we internalize. Um, there's been some interesting research on our perceptions about aging, and we actually age better and healthier if we have a more positive attitude about aging. And so our very perceptions about what aging is going to look like for ourselves can impact our health and well-being as we age. So all of those societal, everything you see on TV or in the workforce, those discriminatory practices can have an impact on our perceptions of our own aging, and that can have a negative consequence on our well-being as we age. The interpersonal, so that purple level there, is how we interact with each other. So this is, as I mentioned, how we speak to each other, how we speak to older adults. You may have heard of the term elder speak. So, talking slower, talking louder, or saying things like sweetie or honey pie or whatever the, local colloquialism is. But that can be really patronizing for older adults. Um, the most common one, we used it in our title, is the okay boomer, right? So we've heard a lot about that in recent years. And then institutionalized are those things like workplace discrimination, housing policies, healthcare policies, anything that has a negative, or those policies and practices that can have negative impacts on aging and our aging experiences. um, you just I know recently in the news there have been a lot of talk about kind of restrictive voting laws in place, and how difficult it can be for older adults to navigate the process to register to vote. So something as not simple but really simple but broadly speaking for our whole, impacts our whole society, can have an impact on older adults if we're not aware of those aging biases that we have. um, and then the structural cultural ageism is really that highest level, often what we see kind of ingrained in what we see in media, the portrayal of older adults in TV shows. I always jump to think of The Simpsons and the older grandpa that's always just mad. Um, and how our society just really kind of fosters that ageism and negative messages we hear and see about aging, um, just really everywhere. And I think at the start of COVID was a good example of really assessing what our society thought about older adults and the value that they placed in their health and well-being. A good example of that. So again, these are all different elements and aspects of ageism that can impact not only our personal aging experience and our perceptions of what that will look like, but also for our whole society and our growing aging population and their experiences. So now that I've said far too much and not given you the opportunity to think about this, we're going to pose another question for you that you can respond to in the chat. I want you to think about kind of having gone through all these examples of what ageism is and what it looks like in different levels. What would a workplace or a campus, if you work at a university, or even just your own experience in whatever uh, circumstance, what would a world without ageism look like? I want you to think about that. And if you think of anything, throw a response up in the chat and we'll try and catch some of those. Mutual respect. There was some discussion about kind of the Southern way of that elder speak coming up. Not making assumptions about people based on their age. Yep, professional development and leadership opportunities offered to everyone, all ages. Valuing individual strengths. Yep, everyone's respected. So as you're posting your responses, I want you to think about how, multi-generational teams, that was a great response. And there's actually some really great research out there on creating multi-generational, intergenerational teams in the workforce and how beneficial it can be for everyone. Communities built to support aging individuals, that's great. Focusing on like transportation and housing. I think that's a challenge that is facing every single community right now is supporting our aging population. Okay, yeah, focusing on kind of that mind power, intelligence, even when we might face some physical limitations as we age. It's interesting, if you think back to that previous question and to this one, it might have seemed a little bit harder to answer this question. I think part of that is sometimes it's hard to think of what it might look like without, what our world might look like without these isms in them. And this applies to, all of the isms when we talk about sexism, racism, including ageism. It can be hard to think about that because it's sometimes so ingrained in our society. So great responses, and I will go ahead and turn over the final kind of portion of our discussion to my colleague, Katie.
All right, thank you, Amy. So we know that ageism exists. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what the effects of this ageism are so that we can understand a little bit more why it's important to think about this and start to combat it where we can, because it's one thing to acknowledge that this exists in the world, but then why does it matter? Why do we need to do something about it? Actually driving us to action is kind of that next step. So what are the impacts of ageism? They are not good. They're pretty much all negative. So the negative consequences, we have just a few of them listed here. One is that ageism restricts our empathy. So by placing older adults in the other category, it can seem like they're almost alien and we no longer feel like we can relate or have empathy for them, which is just wild to me because the goal is that we're all going to become older adults one day, and by othering older adults in our lives now, we're othering our future selves. So that always strikes me as kind of crazy to think about. And when we see people as others, whether it's with ageism or any of the other isms, it limits our ability to see them as individuals. So a lot of the comments about what it would look like without ageism is that we'd be able to better focus on the individual. And so we know that the ageism is getting in the way of that. It's limiting our ability to see individuals, what their needs are, what their strengths are, what their rights are. And elder abuse is a prime example of this. Older adults are marginalized, and so they can become isolated, and oftentimes they don't even report abuse because they don't think that anyone will respond, and a lot of times people don't, and because we don't see it in society as an important issue. So that's just one of the extreme examples of what can happen when we are othering an entire population. Another effect of ageism is on our longevity. As Amy said, our personal perceptions of aging and what we think about it actually affects how long you live, among other factors, of course. But there has been research. Oh, my sound is cutting in and out, it says. Okay, let me know if you start not being able to hear me. Okay. There is research that shows that having a positive view of aging can actually give you 7 more years of life. So Becca Levy is an excellent researcher who's done a lot of research on this and has shown that thinking positively about aging actually can add on 7 years. So there's a lot of things you could do with those 7 years. So internalizing our internal perceptions of aging, when we've internalized all those ageist messages that we're getting from our society, our culture, our institutions, our workplaces, potentially, it has real effects on our own personal individual health and longevity. And it also then, ageism makes aging a politicized issue. You may have heard of the gray tsunami, that term. It's often used as the term meaning that it's something to fear, that there's this huge overwhelming group of older adults, the baby boomers, right, that are going to take over the country. They're going to use up all of our resources, and it's going to be basically horrible zombie apocalypse when the baby boomers start using up all the resources. And this is just an exaggeration based on the stereotypes about aging, right? Because the actual projections indicate that yes, there will be a growing aging population, as Aaron told us in the very beginning, but then that bubble will decline again and age groups will even out. But people will continue to live longer and one day will be in that group. There's also the idea that the older boom is going to just bog everyone down with caring for them, and we'll have this huge money pit of medical expenses, when in reality, the money pit is actually end of life procedures, which are expensive at any age. It doesn't have anything to do with what your age is. So what's actually having more of an impact on healthcare expenditures is the technology that's making healthcare more expensive for everyone, more so than age or people living to older ages. And then one of the other big effects of ageism is that intergenerational conflict. So there was mention of a place without ageism, a world without ageism, a workplace, we'd have more intergenerational mentorships working together. And what we see with ageism in place is there's more of that conflict where olders and youngers are often pitted against each other due to that stereotype that older adults are going to use up all the resources, the jobs that should be going to younger adults, when in reality, there's still a lot of contribution from older adults. And most often those resources that are needed for older ages are not the same resources that are needed at a younger age. And if we could all spend more time working together, it would stop diverting attention from the real issue, which is creating a more fair society for everyone. So these are just some of the negative effects that are around because of our world that we live in with ageism, instead of the one we've dreamed about that doesn't have it. So hopefully this shows you why it's important to think about what can we do to help combat ageism. And if I have missed anything in the chat that anybody wants to chime in about, please bring that up too. So what might we work on to help combat ageism? How can we help combat it either in our personal lives or in the workforce, or if we want to get as, I can't think of the right word, ambitious to think about society at large, we can go all the way there. If you have ideas, you can put them in the chat. And we'll see. I'll try to keep up with my small screen. What can we do to, okay, stop asking, maybe stop asking for the date of a degree. Why do we need to know what year someone got their degree? Provide facts like these for short monthly educational staff development, or be more aware of what I say. Thank you, Sandra. Yep, it starts with us, right? Stop using ageist slogans ourselves. More awareness and training. So yeah, you're all taking a great first step by being here today. Look at all marketing and imagery. Yes, and I would say look at all of it with a critical eye. And then engaging in conversations in the workplace. So yeah, we hope that you take this conversation today out into your workforce and out into your circles and your communities. Intergenerational programs, yes, helping decrease ageism in younger adults and kids. Great.
Sorry, that was mine. I had to interject because I always like
That's okay.
mentioning that.
That also reminds me, because I saw somebody who mentioned the intergenerational mentorship. There's a great New York Times article that's now probably 4 or 5, counting in COVID years, 6 years old now. But it was, what can I learn from a mentor half my age? And it talked about that it was an intergenerational mentorship within the New York Times, and the positives that came out of it for both parties involved. Dropping chronological dates on documents. And then, yeah, just generally keeping up good skills and contacts with people of various ages, making sure that we all are adding different ages to our pool of people that we're connecting with, right? All right, thank you. Erin just dropped the article that I was talking about in the chat. All right, so these are some great ideas, and I encourage you to keep thinking about those and brainstorming on them, because that's the harder part to do, I think, in my opinion, is the action steps, right? So a lot of these you all had discussed, that education, advocating for that change that we need to see, raising the awareness and dispelling our myths. So a lot of times, especially with aging, when it's things we've heard since we were very young children, when you look at fairy tales and Disney movies and how older adults are depicted, we don't even realize that they are myths. So seeking out the education can help kind of bring awareness to what those are and help you dispel them. And then that can help you to advocate for those older adults in your lives and empower them to be able to talk and speak for themselves. Encouraging the intergenerational programming we talked about. And then a lot of people mentioned that starting with yourself and changing the way that you see aging, and starting with that internalized ageism. And instead internalizing more positive messages about aging, which for me usually starts with spending time with older adults. I usually get the most internalized positive messages when I invite older adults to my classes to speak with the college students. It always gives me a boost. So I try to do it numerous times throughout the semester. And then just reconnecting with the older adults in my own life. All right. I'm trying to also kind of like keep up with the chat here. Okay. So yeah, those are some of the ways that we know that we can combat ageism. So then to kind of wrap it up here, I want you to think about one last question, and you can share this in the chat if you want to. For some of you, it might be the same answer that you provided to the previous question, or you can just think about this and keep it for yourself. Tuck it away in the back corner of your mind, or hopefully in the front, so that you will work on it soon. But what is one action step, just one, that you will take to examine your own implicit ageist beliefs. And I would say you've all already taken one step by being here for the education piece today. So then what is one other step that you could do? Let's see, encourage multi-generational work teams. Gen X is sandwiched between boomers and millennials. I'm technically a millennial, but I identify with Gen Xers much more.
Apparently that's called an elder millennial, by the way.
Elder millennial. I'm an elder
Because-
millennial.
Because
I
we
like
have to
that.
apply some of those still technically ageist terms to generations.
Well, that way when people complain about millennials, I can say, well, I'm an elder,
Yeah,
which
there you go.
I feel like holds more respect. Or tweezers. Oh yeah. Offer new mentorship, be more open-minded about new ideas that come up, try not to generalize. Trying to scroll back up. Not approaching certain age groups as having less work ethic than myself when working in a team. Yeah. I think that's always a good idea anytime we're working in a group, whether it's ageism or any other type of assumptions that we're making, to just kind of remind ourselves to check those at the door before we get started. Looking for the strengths in all people in all generations. Excellent. Excellent ideas. All right, you can keep those coming in. Working smarter and not harder from the younger folks. Yeah, trying to seek out that idea of balance, and or even thinking about what it is that you want to learn in your job and being open to seeking out whoever it is that can teach you that, not thinking I have to go to an older person to teach me about this or a younger person, or looking for the people who are just giving the example and approaching them no matter what their age. If I forget where I left something, stop saying that it's because I'm old. Yes, I do this myself when I should know better. All right, well, yeah, we can keep those coming in. And then if there's any other questions or anything that was missed, anything that Erin or Amy would like to add in, that is the end of what I had to tell you all about. Oh, Misty's presentation about work-life balance sounds fun.
So do we have any additional questions for Katie, Amy, or Erin? Feel free to either unmute or type it in the chat. Either is fine.
There have been a few comments about, referencing if you forget something, oh, you're getting old, or it's a sign of Alzheimer's. I will say, when people hear that I'm a gerontologist, that's probably the first thing that I always get is, oh, is this like, I do this or I do this. Is this a sign that I'm, is that too forgetful? They get worried. That's the first thing people ask. And I've said, I wouldn't worry yet. You're good. So I'm always trying to get people to not say just because they're can't remember where their keys are that it's because they're getting older.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amy, Katie, and Erin for your presentation. Lots of excellent information. It sort of relates to something I read about workforce development and sort of the idea that we have all of these jobs that were developed for boomers, right? And as they tend to retire, then how do we replace, like there aren't physically going to be enough people to fill all of those jobs that we currently have now at some point in time. It was sort of an interesting perspective to think about what our workforce looks like now. So as somebody that deals with teens, talking about workforce, it was kind of interesting for me to think about sort of what that population looks like and the amount of jobs. So. Awesome. Well, I thank you very much. Again, just a reminder, I will send out a recording next week that will be posted on the ESP YouTube channel. So somebody had asked about sharing that, and you can share that far and wide for people that might need it, people that might need to hear it because you feel like maybe they would change their perspective a little bit from watching the recording. I think Aaron, Katie, and Amy would agree. Go ahead and send it to them if you think they might watch it and you think it'll make an impact. So. Anyways, so just a reminder, we'll take a little break with webinars. Our next one won't be till October, so we're going to take July and August off. Hopefully we'll see some of you maybe in Branson, Missouri for the national meeting in September. And then you will see some publicity at the end of August about sort of our fall series of webinars that will start in October, October 26th, actually. So anyways.